I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the suitcase murder trial. Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres, they had issues. Issues with substance abuse and issues with one another. And in the end, those issues resulted in a grown man dying locked inside of a suitcase. Here's the story. On February 24th, 2020, Sarah Boone and her boyfriend, Jorge Torres, were spending an evening together at Sarah's home. The couple had a bit of a tumultuous past. Both had been arrested on domestic violence charges, but they always seemed to get back together. On this night, the two were drinking, but what happened next is almost inexplicable. Jorge got inside of a suitcase that was then zipped shut. Why and exactly how he got into the suitcase is not 100% clear, but what is clear is at one point he wanted to get out. He pleaded with Sarah to open the suitcase, but she refused. Instead, she turned on the video camera on her phone and started to record Jorge as he begged for his life. The following morning, she eventually called 911. She said she and Jorge were playing hide and seek, and Jorge ended up in the suitcase. When police responded, they found Jorge dead in the suitcase. Sarah has been charged with second-degree murder, but now claims she was the victim and is claiming battered spouse syndrome. What is the truth? So in most cases, when you're talking about a murder trial and a suitcase, that's where the remains end up, right? Sometimes people are unfortunately dismembered, put into one or more suitcases, and their bodies discarded. Someone finds them, and then investigators try to put the case together. That's not the situation. Here, the suitcase itself is the alleged murder weapon. That Jorge Torres is inside there, locked, and can't get out, and dies as a result. So I want you to take a listen. This is Melissa Roughgarden, who is one of the CSI people, describing that suitcase and its dimensions.
Prior to placing the suitcase into evidence, did you process it?
I took measurements of the suitcase.
What are the measurements of the suitcase?
It was 28 inches in length, 20 inches wide, and 8 7/8 inches deep.
So there you see the suitcase inside the courtroom. And that was the first thing that struck me when I saw that. I was like, that looks like pretty much a normal suitcase, not an oversized suitcase, but a very normal sized suitcase. Again, the first time you hear the story, you're like, what? A man was inside of the suitcase? I want you to take a look, because what I have here, right next to me, is a suitcase with the same exact size, 28 inches by 20 wide, about 8, just over 8, almost 9 inches deep when you open it up. So this is it. This is the dimensions, and you look at, how tall I am next to this, right? Take a look at that. I mean, so this is where Jorge died, a suitcase the exact size of this. Which brings me to my first question, and it's an important question, I think, in all of this, and it's about the suitcase, it's about Jorge. How did Jorge fit inside the suitcase? How does he get in there? How did that happen? Let me bring in my guest, my expert, forensic death investigator, professor of forensics at Jacksonville State University, and the host of the very popular Body Bags podcast. Joseph Scott Morgan is with us. Thanks so much. Let me just ask you initially, were you surprised when it was revealed the dimensions of the suitcase? It's a normal suitcase. It's the size of my suitcase.
No. Am I surprised that he fit in there, Vin? Is that the question?
Are you surprised that it wasn't? I thought it was a supersized suitcase. I thought it was a jumbo. I didn't know. I had no idea the size of it. Now I found out it's just a normal suitcase.
I'm not necessarily surprised. I've traveled with my wife. I know how much can fit inside of one of these suitcases. So That's the reality of it. And you'd be surprised. The thing about the suitcase that you're talking about, I'm so glad that you guys picked up at least a template of this thing. I think that's very important for everybody to understand. Understand this is not a hard-sided suitcase, and this plays into another factor that we'll get into in just a minute. But this thing's rather malleable. You can bend to a certain degree, particularly when you close that lid and you zip the thing up. You'll see how it kind of, I don't want to use the term balloons out, but it kind of, kind of pokes out a bit. So you've got a little bit of room in there. And we have to keep in mind that this victim, Ben, he is a tiny guy. I mean, he's very, very tiny.
Well, let's do this.
Yeah.
The video of George begging for his life as Sarah records him. For some folks, it's tough to watch, but I'm going to play it right now.
It's tough for me to watch, Ben.
Yeah, but it's important. It's probably the most important piece of evidence in the entire case.
It is.
So let's take a look and a listen to it, just to have a better idea of what we can gather from the video, what we see and what we hear.
Sarah.
For everything you've done to me.
Sarah.
For everything you've done to me.
Sarah.
You.
Sarah.
You.
Sarah.
Stupid.
Sarah.
That's my name. Don't wear it up.
Sarah. I can't breathe, babe. Seriously.
Yeah, that's when you do when you choke me.
Sarah. 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 Sarah, I can't breathe, babe.
That's on you.
Sarah, I can't breathe.
That's on you.
Sarah.
Real or ransom. I want to get video for it extra. Because I got this.
Sarah.
Real or ransom.
Sarah. Sarah, I can't breathe, babe.
Oh. That's what I feel like when you drink on me.
Sarah.
You.
Breathe, Sarah.
Yeah. You should probably shut the up.
Sarah.
So another important part, and you mentioned this, Joseph, is George Torres's size, and we now know his height and his weight. Let's take a look. 5'2", which is 62 inches, right? So
Yeah.
it's 28 inches high, 20 inches wide. He's 62 inches tall, but very slender, 103 pounds. So he's a very thin man. As we opened this up in the newsroom, and we had some folks who work here who are a little bit smaller, it seemed like the way you would be able to get in there is some sort of a fetal type of position.
Yeah.
And I think the suitcase would have to be lying down. It'd have to be lying down, and then sort of get in it in a fetal position. So if that's the case, what happens to someone who is stuck in that position? You know, over minutes, over hours, perhaps overnight.
Yeah, it's what we would refer to as a contracted position. If we were working this case out on the scene, so you've got him, kind of in this position, knees are thrust up toward the chest, the shoulders or elbows pressed in, hands down, and you said it. It is truly, he has to be in a fetal position. It's the only way you can accomplish this. But let's keep in mind, and I don't want to bury the lead here, but we know what the medical examiner stated relative to the cause of death, Vin. And she talked about that this was a positional asphyxia. Now, we see positional asphyxias, and if you'll give me just a little latitude, over the course of my career, I worked several positional asphyxia cases where I would have people that were heroin addicts that had fixed, say, for instance, on a toilet. They shot up on a toilet and then fell between the toilet and the wall. And they're in this kind of hazy, drug-induced, dreamlike state, and they can't move. And because they're so contracted in that position, their chest can't rise and fall. So, you know, the key to us living and sustaining life is to be able to uptake oxygen. It oxygenates the blood oxygenates the brain. And so without this, you're going to have an oxygen deprivation event. And it's a slow, agonizing. You know what's really striking to me, and she says this on tape, Vin. She says, you better shut the F up. What did she mean by that? Because for me, as an investigator and knowing what I know about death investigation, the more you talk, the more oxygen you burn, okay? It requires you to have free oxygen to flow and to be able to converse with somebody and just conduct, you know, normal everyday activities. She's telling him, you better shut up. Did she know something more? Does she know the fact that this is a position to be in oxygen deprivant circumstances? I don't know, perhaps.
Yeah. Joseph Scott Morgan staying with us. Coming up next, could George have died any other way?
The cause of death, which I put on the death certificate, is positional asphyxia with environmental suffocation. And the manner of death I classified as homicide.
Sarah Boone is charged with second-degree murder after her boyfriend suffocated inside of a suitcase.
He's in the suitcase still.
There are multiple domestic violence incidents.
You two hitting each other. Sarah. That's my name. Don't wear it up.
He's telling you, Sarah, I can't breathe.
George Torres locked inside of a suitcase, begging for help.
I thought he was okay.
The Suitcase Murder Trial. Live coverage weekday mornings, 8/7 Central on Court TV.
I tried giving her CPR.
The problem is I fell asleep. I fell asleep.
When did you do CPR?
This morning, when I found it.
Before you called?
Yes!
1 o'clock right now.
I tried. I was awake, but I actually got out of the bed at like 12:30ish, whatever. So I came downstairs, and I was like, oh, he's in the suitcase still. That video of the morning when police first respond of Sarah Boone always struck me as something just wasn't sitting right with the way she was acting, the way she was speaking. There's something that was off about it. And now the more we've gotten to know Sarah Boone, we understand that there are a lot of things about her that are a little bit off. And that gets us back to this story. So she's doing CPR the next morning. Like, she slept all night. George Torres was in that suitcase all night long. I want you to take a listen to the medical examiner here talking about the cause and manner of death, which is significant. It's part of what you need to prove your case. Let's take a listen.
Did you perform the autopsy?
Yes.
And what were your findings as to cause and manner of death?
So the cause of death, which I put on the death certificate, is positional asphyxia with environmental suffocation. And the manner of death I classified as homicide.
You also mentioned environmental suffocation. Could you tell us a little bit more what that means in more layman's terms?
So that just means there's not enough oxygen in the environment that the person is in. You could think of somebody who's in an enclosed space where there's a fixed amount of oxygen. So as that oxygen is, as that person is breathing, they're using up all the oxygen. And once it's gone, there's no oxygen left. Or you could think of maybe people who are, climbing Mount Everest. There's not as much oxygen up there, and that's why they have oxygen tanks. So it just means that the amount of oxygen available in the air around that person is not enough to sustain them.
So this testimony is significant. Obviously, it's the medical examiner, but like any other expert, it's opinion testimony.
you know, based on her expertise and the examination she did and all of her life's work and how she got to the position where she is. But sometimes experts don't necessarily agree. And this is one area where many times they don't agree. Which brings me to my next question, which is, could George have died in any other way? Is there any other possibility here for Jorge Torres' death other than what the medical examiner has testified to? Still with me, forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan. Before you answer the question, I want you to take a listen to this back and forth between Sarah Boone's defense attorney, James Owens, and the medical examiner, because I found it fascinating, but I also found that part of it was going over my head, so you're going to need to explain a lot of it. So let's take a listen to that back and forth.
Did you run any tests on the suitcase?
No.
Were you aware that the suitcase, the lock on it or the zipper on it was broken? The pull handles were broken?
Yes, I did know that.
Do you agree if there is a portion of the zipper that's open that air can travel in and out of that space?
Yes.
You described the proximal third of the left anterior descending coronary artery having greater than a 75% narrowing of the lumen due to its centrically placed firm yellow-white fibrolipid atherosclerotic plaque?
Yes.
And is that pretty much verbatim with what you said in the report?
Yes.
And that terminology is synonymous with a single vessel high-grade atherosclerotic coronary artery disease.
Yes.
And in that location, it's kind of a classic location for what people refer to as the widowmaker.
Yes.
Because of the location in that vessel that supplies most of the circulation to the left ventricle.
Yes.
If you had a spasm in that artery, that could nearly totally obstruct the lumen and cause a fatal heart attack, could it not?
It could. It could cause a dysrhythmia, yes.
I'm sorry?
A dysrhythmia or an abnormal beating of the heart.
But that could kill him.
It could.
If he were to get out of the suitcase on his own and he would have passed out or fell asleep on the couch and she would have woken up the next day about that time and came down, and he was dead on the couch, and you did this autopsy, would it be fair to say that in your ruling on cause of death, that single vessel coronary artery osculosclerosis would be your probable cause of death?
It could be.
So absent the positional asphyxia or the environmental asphyxia, and he was dead, and you did the autopsy, it would be fair to say that you would determine this was a natural death from an isolated coronary heart disease, would you not?
It would depend on the circumstances.
Okay, Joseph Scott Morgan, could George have died any other way? Could it have been the widowmaker, the heart attack that he's alluding to here?
No. As a matter of fact, if these two had never come across one another and met one another, and particularly were together that night and these actions had not been taken, there's a high probability that George would still be with us. And there are people walking around with this level of occlusion out there all around us. And so they're not falling over dead. This line of logic is faulty. I mean, you can use it. He can say this. He can say anything he wants. But what the doctor is doing here, the pathologist, she's making a ruling. She's not talking about what is. She's talking about what was. And what was, he was actually indwelling that suitcase. And just so that folks understand, if everybody watching us tonight, Ben, the next time you go to your refrigerator, just imagine your refrigerator, if you took all the stuff out of it, the shelves and everything, and you look at that space in the refrigerator. Well, as you well know, if you go to buy a refrigerator, it's measured in cubic inches of space. So you begin to think about the cubic inches of available oxygen in that area. anytime you put a body or anything inside of a suitcase like this, it does what's referred to as oxygen displacement. So by virtue of his body being in there, let's say, I don't know what the dimensions, internal dimensions of this thing are in cubic inches, but it's limited. So once he fits into that space, he's displaced that oxygen. Even if there is a crack in their vent, like he was talking about with the teeth or whatever's missing there, that's still going to be insufficient for oxygen uptake in that environment. So you have to look at it that way, and that's the way the forensic pathologist is looking at it, Ben.
So clarify this for me, if you can, in like 30 seconds. Right? It's not easy.
Thanks, man. Okay.
The positional asphyxiation versus the lack of oxygen, are they working in combination, or is it one or the other?
Yes, it's working in combination. It's the positional asphyxia with him displacing oxygen. Ergo, you hit upon this underlying thing she talked about, this environmental suffocation. You're pressing out all of the oxygen. You can't replace it. The only thing that allowed him to be able to vocalize and to live that long was that the fact that that material on that thing was permeable enough so that he had a bit of oxygen in there. If this was a hard-sided suitcase, he would have died a lot sooner.
So there was enough air flowing in there, or oxygen getting in there for the short term, but for the long term, between the positioning and everything
Very short
else.
term, yeah.
All right. We still have a lot to get to on this case, the Sarah Boone suitcase murder case. I'm Vinnie Politan. We will keep digging for answers as the investigation continues. I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation into the suitcase murder trial. Now, through the years, I've covered many stories involving suitcases, but this is the first time I've ever seen a case where the suitcase is the alleged murder weapon. Here's more.
Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres were involved in an on-again, off-again tumultuous relationship filled with accusations of cheating and abuse. But on February 23rd, 2020, Sarah and Jorge were together at her home, spending some time together and drinking. But at some point that night, for some reason, Jorge ended up locked inside a suitcase, while Sarah taunted him as she recorded a video. Jorge tragically died, and now Sarah is facing murder charges. There are still many lingering questions in this case about their relationship and exactly what happened once Jorge got inside that suitcase.
The relationship between Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres is really important here to understand and try to understand the history of it and how it could result in what happened here, which is a grown man locked in a suitcase, literally begging for his life, being taunted, and then dying. And it wasn't an easy death. This is he suffered. He absolutely suffered. This was torture. Because you know what's going to happen. You feel it happening. You realize it's happening. And you know there's someone right there that can help you, and they're not helping you. So getting back to the relationship, you know, she lived in a condo/apartment type of complex. So there are neighbors that are close by, and you know, sometimes you're having fights and things, people can hear what's going on, right? You don't have quite as much privacy as you would living somewhere else. So I want you to take a listen to Vincent Battaglia. This is one of her neighbors describing what he has witnessed, what he has heard, and an interesting conversation with Sarah Boone.
How would you describe the walls that separated your units?
Thin, like very thin walls.
And with those walls being so thin, would you ever have occasion to hear arguing and yelling coming from Sarah Boone and George Torres's apartment?
Yeah.
How often would you hear this?
Almost daily.
Did Sarah Boone ever approach you about the things that you heard coming from their apartment?
Yes.
What did she tell you?
Pretty much just kind of like, if I do hear anything, like through the walls or whatever, just out back, just kind of keep my mouth shut, like don't really speak about it or anything like that or say anything to anyone. And I just was like, okay.
Did she make any motions with her hands?
Yeah, like just kind of like, you know, finger over the lips, like kind of shh, like keep it hush, like that kind of thing.
Daily? Like, this is a daily occurrence between these two. Which brings me to my next question. And it's about these two. It's about Sarah. It's about George. How toxic was this relationship? To what level? Don't forget, she's charged with murder, that she did it on purpose. She wanted him to die. She knew he was going to die. Let me bring in my experts. Joining us, forensic death investigator, professor of forensics at Jacksonville State University and the host of the very popular Body Bags podcast, Joseph Scott Morgan is with us. And also joining us, clinical and forensic neuropsychologist and author of the book, The New Rules of Attachment, Dr. Judy Ho. Dr. Judy, first question I had for you was on the way he described that conversation with Sarah, where Sarah's saying, if you see it, shh, shh. Why do you think she's saying that to her neighbor?
Well, she has some awareness that clearly this is a tumultuous relationship. She doesn't want him to call the cops and state that there's been domestic disturbances. She wants to stay under the radar. So that tells you that she knows full well what's going on in the relationship isn't okay, to the point where she's basically saying to her neighbor, don't say anything. And we didn't hear from Vincent if it was almost in a threatening way or not, but clearly she was sending a message to him like, do not call the police on us.
I want to take a listen to Sarah Boone's interrogation, because in the interrogation interview, she describes some of these domestic violence incidents. Let's take a listen.
I think the last physical was probably, you said, I think, what, a month ago? Where you got the injury, right? You said that was a month ago?
A few weeks, give or take, yeah.
A few weeks. That was the last, like, physical altercation between the two of you? You said a month ago he hit you with a curtain rod.
Yeah, with a curtain rod. That's why I can't believe you guys didn't take that either.
Huh.
Like, we've been good. I don't know if, like, it's since the last time he got out of jail.
No, you said you guys have been good. What's your definition?
I've been good. I don't think you all understand. He comes at me all the time. He comes at me. So it's either I flee or try to go upstairs and go to sleep. That's usually what it is. And I don't know if you talked to Brian about any of that, but most of the time when I flee, I go over there. So.
Right, but you're saying that you guys have been good, and when I asked you yesterday, there hasn't, the last incident that you could remember was the curtain rod incident, which you said was a month ago, so.
Give or take.
Right, so what do you mean by he comes after you? Like,
he gets belligerently drunk.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if you all have looked through my phone yet and seen any of the pictures and the videos that I have taken.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, I started documenting everything.
Okay.
So you all will see in my pictures bloody fingers, split foreheads, he split my nose. I've got this.
Right.
I don't know if Brian told you about it, where I had to have almost I had one really bad surgery, but then it got really, 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 really bad, where I had to go like 4 or 5 more times afterwards for them to tend to it. From him poking me in the back of the leg.
Right.
So it's...
Then why are you still with him?
Everybody asks me that. When I tell you guys this, I really love him. Like I do. And I feel like I can help him.
Dr. Judy Ho, what did you think of that ending, the way she all of a sudden you know, emotionally, everything else changes, and she just wanted to help him. That's why she stayed.
It was really interesting, Vinny, because for most of that conversation, she was in a very defensive stance. She actually came straight out and essentially blamed the police, it sounds like, saying, well, you guys didn't take that, even though we knew that he was so violent towards me. I have been documenting it. There was a very defensive stance, like, I'm finally standing up for myself. Why don't you guys see this or believe me? But the minute that they asked her, well, why? Why do you still stay with this man? The emotions change so quickly. And of course, we don't know exactly what she's thinking internally, but the fact that her emotions are so labile that they change on a dime, I think it makes people wonder if these emotions are just being played for her advantage, or if they're true emotions where she just spontaneously all of a sudden starts to have this flood of emotions of love for him.
Joseph Scott Morgan, the detectives clearly are skeptical. How about you? Are you buying what she's selling in this interview?
I don't doubt that there was contact between these two. Was it chronic and daily? I don't know. I think that they both like to drink and imbibe quite a bit. So you combine that with, you know, a tendency toward erratic behavior in the first place. They probably both got serious issues. Yeah, I think that you can probably take a kernel of truth from it. However, you begin to think about the punishment that she applied to this man, and it doesn't seem like something that a loving person would do. You know, you and I just listened to that horrible recording one more time, and her taunting him. This really goes beyond the pale, man.
Let's take a listen to more from this interview. Again, her describing the nature of their relationship.
But he's changed. He changed.
And that's why you're still with him, even though he's done all these things to you. And
when I tell you I love him, I love him.
Even when you love somebody, you have limits.
Everybody tells me that. All my neighbors still tell me that. The office, property manager.
At some point, somebody gets enough, then they have to do something to defend themselves.
I would just flee. I had him arrested how many times?
But you also went down and bailed him out.
I know.
The next day.
I know.
What's on your laptop?
What was I going to tell you? Oh, previously, I actually looked up how to file a restraining order.
Okay.
Because I would kick him out, his parents, because of them constantly having to take him back in, his bags of clothes, all his stuff. The last time, their father came out and irate and just I don't even know if he knew Lucas was in the car. Just opened the back of my car and just started throwing all his crap in, just throwing it. Like the car would jostle, he was throwing all his stuff. At that point, because I continually did it, not continually, I think I maybe did it 3 times, and he has nowhere else to go, they got fed up and said, nope, either you're staying there or you're staying here. But if you're staying here at their place, it's permanent. You're not going back over there anymore. So what happens is he pursues me.
Okay, Dr. Judy Ho, first, like her, again, riding that emotional roller coaster from sentence to sentence at times.
Yeah.
And also, I think similar to that is she calls up, has him arrested, and then the next morning bails him out. Like, it's almost the way she's describing it, moment to moment, she changes. Their relationship or the way she's feeling about him seems to change from moment to moment. Like, get him out of here, arrest him. Oh, I love him. I want to bail him out.
You're absolutely right about that, Vinny. And another thing that I picked up on is how quickly she can display a very strong emotion and then just so quickly as it came on, put it back away. You know, there's 2 clips now where we've seen her immediately go to tears when she says, I love him. And it was so interesting because she says, when I tell you I love him, I love him. It's like she's trying to sell a story in a way about her feelings and trying to convince her audience. But another thing that I thought was notable is how she almost relished in telling her stories. She really seemed like she was enjoying this focused attention these two detectives were giving her as she's reeling them in with the story of this is the back and forth. And oh, the parents were also a part of this drama because they put these really strict guidelines and it was either them or me essentially. And so finally, this is what I had to do. But notice just the way that she was presenting this story. It's almost like she was telling a fictional story and she was performing it rather than this is a person's life and this person is dead.
Yeah. Dr. Judy Ho, thank you so much. Joseph Scott Morgan staying with us. Still to come, was George thrown down the stairs?
I was sitting on my bed on FaceTime with my girlfriend at the time, and I literally felt the wall shake.
One of the most successful true crime TV shows ever.
This is crazy.
Now has a new home on America's original true crime obsession, 48 Hours on Court TV. Coming up next on Court TV. The convicted murderer of the horrific honor killings.
What happened that night?
Speaks out for the first time on camera.
You make it sound like you're the victim here.
Exactly. Interview with a killer. Sunday, 8/7 Central on Court TV.
Sometimes I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. I'm afraid of it. I'm afraid of his family. My son can't come over here because he's here.
That's one of the incidents where police are responding. It's a domestic violence call. This was a toxic relationship. Things were happening and seemingly violent at times, or allegedly violent at times, right? I want to listen to another piece of testimony from one of Sarah's neighbors, Vincent Battaglia, turning out to be a pretty important witness in all of this because he lives right next door, describing what he heard coming from the other side of the wall, from inside Sarah's home.
What about that evening sticks out to you?
That sticks out to me from that night was literally just there was a very, very loud noise that I heard that was loud and powerful enough to shake my bedroom wall. And I remember that because I was sitting on my bed on FaceTime with my girlfriend at the time, and I literally felt the wall shake and it stopped me mid-conversation. And she even asked me through the computer, like, what was that? And I was like, I have no idea.
A loud noise coming from Sarah Boone's apartment that night. What could make that loud noise that would literally shake a neighbor and make a neighbor stop and say, what was that? That brings me to my next question. Was George thrown down the stairs? I mean, was he put in a suitcase at the top of the stairwell and then thrown down the stairs, and that's the noise that Vincent Battaglia is hearing next door? Still with me, forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan. I have some more information I want to give you. I want to give you all the information I have so you can give us your best answer to that question. This is from the autopsy report, Joseph. George had long nail scratches to his mid-upper back, a large nail scratch to the back of his neck, contusions to his left shoulder, left skull, and forehead contusions considered blunt force trauma, and a cut near his busted lip. So those are some of the things from the autopsy report that they found on Jorge Torres. Now let's listen to the medical examiner describe that blunt force trauma.
These are typical wounding patterns for blunt force trauma. And when I say blunt force trauma, that can mean something striking a part of the body, or on the other hand, it can be the body striking an object. And that causes injury to the skin, and to the soft tissue, and sometimes the deeper tissues, depending on how severe or how strong that blunt force trauma is.
Are these injuries consistent with a person being struck with a baseball bat?
They could be, yes.
Are they consistent with a person being pushed down a flight of stairs?
They could be, yes.
Can you say whether or not these injuries occurred while George Torres was in the suitcase?
No.
Okay. From your perspective, was George thrown down the stairs, putting all the pieces of information, including what the neighbor said, you know, hearing some loud noise that night?
It's certainly plausible. Of course, he would have had to have entered or be placed into that suitcase at the head of the staircase. I can't see her putting him in a suitcase and dragging suitcase and him up the staircase and then pushing him back down. It would be akin to being in a tumble dryer, Vin, very violent. There's no way to brace yourself in here. So when she's talking about these abrasion contusions that he has all about, and keep in mind, they're in a variety of different areas. It's not like you have a central point of impact where, I mean, we've all fallen at some point in time. You fall down, you strike your head, okay? Or you run into something. Or you raise up and hit your head on a shelf or something like that. That's going to be a single focal area. This guy's got multiple injuries on multiple locations over his body. Now, we do know, or at least she has stated, that they fought regularly, right? So you have to look at this from the forensic pathology standpoint. The assessment that the physician stated after her examination, she would give us a timing of these injuries. And what I mean by that is this something from the distant past, or is this something very recent, you know, where there's actually no healing going on or no significant healing? The skin is reacting to trauma in a very specific way. It's still very raw and fresh. And so that would be part of this report too. I liked how the prosecutor, I believe it was, in that line of questioning, asked about the baseball bat, because that opens the door up to say, well, could he have been pushed down the staircase inside of the suitcase? And she can't really say that that had happened. You know, there's any number of things that could have happened. He could have been in the suitcase. She could have pounced on it. She could have kicked it. And there's no way for him to protect himself. And just think about this. This adds another layer of horror. You and I, if we're trying to protect ourselves or defend ourselves, we can see it coming perhaps. If you're blind inside of a dark suitcase, you don't know where the next thing's coming from. And so either he's being assaulted while in the suitcase on the floor, on the ground level, or he's being pushed down. Either way, it's very horrific.
From hearing his voice, because we have about 20 seconds here, when you hear his voice, do you think he would, if he was thrown down the staircase, that he'd still be able to communicate the way he did?
Yeah, I think he could. And it's hard to, you know, judge. Even people that are concussed, they can still verbalize things. It doesn't mean you can't talk. And you got this other added element of alcohol involved here too, which makes this even more intriguing, you know, when you begin to assess everything that happened to this poor man.
Joseph Scott Morgan, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
George Torres died a terrible death, one that could have easily been avoided. All Sarah Boone had to do was unzip that suitcase, period. Unzip the suitcase, and George lives. But she didn't. And that may be the one simple fact that this jury just can't get past. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for the answers as the investigation continues.